Welcome to Oracle BPM Patch Set 6 release video. In this demonstration, we are going to watch as our three business users go through a full end-to-end BPM lifecycle for their new listen property process. We will hear about the benefits they get from the browser-based BPM Composer, where they can model using standard, commonly used BPMN 2.0 notation. How they can easily build and test forms to collect and validate data from process participants. How they can test the process without needing to go through the timely and expensive exercise of deploying it into production and training users. And how they can analyze the process for bottlenecks and optimize the process performance. And most importantly, we are going to see how they do this without ever needing to go to IT for help. Let's watch as Joakim, our business analyst, models the process, designs the forms, and creates the business rules. Then hands over the models to the process owner, Pablo, who will review and test the process, before handing it over to James, who will analyze the process for bottlenecks and ensure it has acceptable performance.
Hi, my name is Joakim Suarez. I am the business analyst. My task is to model our leasing property process and hand it over for sign-off by Pablo, who is the process owner. So, this is the business process composer. As you can see, you can organize your work into folders and projects. I created a folder named Leasing, so let's zoom into it to get a clearer view. Now, let's create a project and name it to Leasing Property Project. I'll write a description so that Pablo and the others knows what the project will address. I'll save the project into the same folder I've just created. I will not use template today, though templates come very handy, for example providing assets to business architect, such as organization, business object, rules, services, etc. For the business architect to just pick them. I will not use approval workflow, which is used to approve deployment to runtime environments. Here you define who will be working in the project and what rights they have in terms of editing and viewing. This is the project page, where you can see all the assets in the project, and also the recent activity, which shows what has been modified in the project. In the right upper corner you can see if someone else is viewing or editing the project. But first, let's start by editing the project. And now create our first process in this project. The process I'm going to model is our prospect approval process, so let's name it that and open it. First of all, I'll change the start and the end event to none, since we're not going to receive any messages to start this process. The way to start this process should be by a form and a human interaction. So let's start by adding an interactive, which will involve a human to interact and name it Collect Lease Information. I know that we need 3 interactive steps in this process, so to speed the modeling up, I use the stamp tool and then just stamp the 3 activities out. Now it looks quite ugly, so let's click the Auto Layout, which will make my process readable again. After Collect Lease Information, we need to review the prospect data, and after that we need to perform a marketing review, and finally a health and safety review. The horizontal box is called swim lanes and translates to a role. Let's name this role to Clerk, meaning that all activities in that swim lane will be handled by the role Clerk. I want the review prospect data to be handled by the offer approver role, and the marketing review to be handled by marketing, and finally the health and safety review to be handled by health and safety team. You also have the possibilities to choose roles, of course. A process could potentially be quite long and involve many steps, so you have the possibility to zoom in and out. Of course, a process should not involve too many steps, and a good practice is to keep the process viewable and decompose to sub-processes instead of having lengthy processes. After review prospect data, we need to add gateway, or a decision point to choose whether we should continue or request for more information. After the gateway, we add transition, or an arrow for the request more information way. I'll name the transitions to more information. Since I will do more or less the same thing as I just showed you, I'll spare you the time by fast forwarding the next section. As a business architect, you might just use the green activity for human interaction and blue for system or automatic activities, and document each activity for the process developer to implement. Or you can use the full BPM and 2.0 palette and in fact implement it yourself if you have the knowledge. In my case, I use a few of the BPM and 2 activities and do the implementation, as you will see. The yellow activity which I've added is a rule activity where I will calculate the rates and depending on the outcome decide if the prospects are profitable or not. The blue activities with cogs are service activities, which means system calls, for example to a web service. The other blue activities with speaker on it is a notification task. I'll use it to send an email to a customer. To be able to execute the property approval process, I need to change the first activity to an initiator task, which means that I will initiate a process by a human. I need to create a human task, name it, and open it. In a human task, you can describe deadlines for how long it should take to complete the task before you escalate it. Set the priority for the task, decide which outcome a task should have, for example. In this case, it's just approve or reject. You can also define advanced routing and assignment. For example, you can use parallel, serial, or voting. Change of manager, for example. You can also configure a form. In this case, I'll use a web form. So let's create one and name it Collect Leads Information Form and edit it. This is where you design the forms. You simply drag and drop the HTML controls into the forms and configure them. First, I drag two panels to be able to have two sections, then add a text control to capture and present company name, which I mark as required or mandatory if you want. You can also, for example, state the maximum length, the error message when trying to pass the maximum number of characters or violate the input pattern. You can also add a hint on how the end user should complete the field. Of course, you can have your form looks any way you like it by specifying style sheets. I need the end user to select business type, so I add a drop-down box and add different options for the user to choose from. Now, let's fast forward my work since it's essentially the same operation I need to complete. I add the rest of the fields, a phone number, an email address, a tab which I add the created panels to. All controls can be configured with different behavior, such as how the input should be done, errors we're not applying, styles, etc. And it's as easy as simple as drag and drop. Under the covers, the business object to store the form will be created for you automatically. So this is the way to model it top down. You can also model it bottom up by providing a schema or a business object to generate the form from. You also have the possibility to print the form, for example, to have a review meeting. Testing what you have done can be achieved by clicking the test web form link, and there you can verify that it both looks good and behaves as you intended. To be able to pass data to and from the forms, I need to do data association. First of all, I create a data object which will hold data from the business object, which has been automatically created from the form design I did. Business objects are definitions of data, and data objects are the one to hold the data. So we'll select the type as the collect information form and name it collect leads information data. That data object is now associated with the process, and I can use it as the output from the form by dragging it to outputs. We also need to store the outcome from the form. In this case, if the user hits the approve or reject button, I'll name it review outcome, and as I can see in the outputs column, it's a string. I then drag the created variable to the output assignment and hit apply. So now I can change the transition condition so it goes in the rejected way arrow if the variable we added as outcome is rejected. I simply select the variable in the expression editor and add equals reject, which is the outcome that was default in the human task. Let's add documentation. I open the documentation tab and click the process name. Here I add information about the intention of the process, who is responsible, for example. You can also add links to your document system, web links, videos, etc. I also need to provide the end user with help on how to fill out this form by selecting the first interactive. To be a bit more clearer to the process developer, I add a note on the update lead system activity that he'll need to verify that it was the correct service I've chosen, because I'm not 100% sure of that. I realize that I need a business object for my calculate rate rule. First of all, I add a module, which is similar to a map, which will hold one or more business objects. Modules is a good way of organizing your business objects. Let's name it prospect. and add a business object named rent decision. If you already have a schema, you can define the business object from that. In this case, I'll create it from scratch, since it's not part of my corporate standard schemas and I'll only use it for an implementation detail in my process. I want the business object to hold two attributes. First, the floor space, which will be of type real. Real means a comma-separated number. I also add the attribute rent, which will also be of type real. Let's have a look at the rule which I've created. This is a decision table where I decide the rent depending on how much floor space the customer is going to rent. So depending on the range of the floor space, I calculate the rent and set the business object that we've created to the results. So for example, here you can see that if the floor space is less than 100, I'll calculate the rent to the floor space times 0.99. If it's between 100 and 200, I set it to times 88. I will now add a service call in my process. First I choose the business catalog, which holds services, human tasks and rules. Then I create a new service. I've got a web service URL that I've gotten from IT that I now paste into the URL field. Since there are different type of ports in this web service, I choose the SOAP port type and press OK. Normally you're provided with a template which will include the service, or the process developer add this for you. But it is possible to add it yourself. So we've added the service to the business catalog, and now we have to choose it in the service activity. So we choose the service call and select the My Service, which was the name of the service we've just created. It is time to configure the notification task to send email to the customer. First, let's select which email address we'll send the mail from and add send@oracle.com. For the to address, we will select contact email from our data object. That was filled out in the form by simply select it from the expression editor. The body will inform the customer that the application has been approved, and also take the opportunity to inform the decided rent by combining text with the attribute rent in our data object. I set the subject just to lease approved. I know that Pablo, the process owner, likes to have different colors in the swim lane. So let's change that. It also makes the process a bit more readable when the swim lanes is more differentiated from each other. And of course, Pablo will be happy. A good practice is to take snapshots. Snapshot is a copy of the project as it looked when you took it. Use snapshot to be able to compare different versions of the project and to have the possibility to revert to prior versions. In this case, I'll take a snapshot of the model process as it was before I handed over to process owner Pablo. So I'm now finished with the process modeling work for this time, and will now handle the process over to Pablo, the process owner, to review the process and have it signed off.
So, as the process owner, I have a couple of tasks to do as part of the BPM lifecycle, such as review and test the processes, as well as check and complete, if needed, any documentation attached to the different project artifacts. This way, I'll be able to identify any issue in the development before the whole project goes live. To that end, I will start by opening the project finished by Joakim. Process Composer provides an easy-to-use environment where multiple users can work simultaneously. Best way to check all artifacts contained in a project is through the gallery. In here we have processes, human tasks and rules, and within the BPM modeler I can review the whole BPM process, with all the user tasks, business rules, service activities, and notifications. The update list system is not yet available, so I better disable its service task for the upcoming test. The editor allows a user to mark an activity as draft, indicating it is not yet configured and thus will be ignored in the tests. Draft activities are easily identified because are grayed out in the model. Although having nodes in the model, like the one we have here, is always a good idea, every process must include rich documentation that will help the BPM stakeholders to understand all the details. Process Composer allows users to include process-level documentation, but also activity-level documentation. I'm going to add some additional comments on my own. Please report any issue to either Joakim or Pablo. I can also generate a complete report so that other people can review the process offline. In the report, one can find all the information about the process, including the model itself and details of each of the activities. Okay, so now, after a complete review of the model, I can walk through the process as an end user. This will definitely help to identify issues and gaps before it goes live. To that end, I will close the PPMN model window and use the process player. The process player feature will let me to run the process as if I were a real participant. There are specific settings here, like the users for every role in the process, and also select which process I do want to test. The process starts to run and will stop in every user task. I can run such task by selecting the user assigned to it and opening the associated form, which will be exactly the one used in real. In the form, I can type in some dummy data, oops, wrong format. Forms may contain built-in validations and tips for the correct syntax. That will help end users to complete the forms. Once finished, I can click the Submit button to let the process continue. In the following user task, I can review all data just entered a couple of seconds ago by opening its form. The task participant can review the data and approve or reject the operation, just like in the real environment. The execution continues, and I go through remaining user tasks by directly approving them, this time without opening the forms. And finally, the process ends successfully. As a process owner, Composer helped me to review the project, check and update the documentation, and perform a real test of the processes. This task will help to identify any issue to be fixed before the project goes live, saving time and costs, as well as avoiding future problems in production environments.
This is James. I am a process analyst. Using Process Composer, I've been collaborating with Joakim and Pablo on the design of our lease prospect approval process. We are at a point in our BPM methodology lifecycle where we have solidified the requirements of our process and captured the process model definition. As part of our methodology, we would like to discover any potential process bottlenecks, areas where we can reduce costs in our process, and identify the potential return on our investment when automating our process using Oracle BPM. We can achieve these goals through process simulation. Process simulation enables us during the process design and into production to understand where we can improve our process across time, cost, and unit dimensions. Oracle BPM is aligned with our process methodology, enabling us to continue our team collaboration from modeling now into simulation all within Process Composer. Let's begin. We start by creating a process simulation definition. The definition gives us control to represent different business conditions over time, processes participating in the simulation, and resources available to perform the tasks in the process being simulated. We will name it Peak Season Simulation. Our peak season for rental requests lasts 1 month, and it begins at the beginning of December. Next, we associate which processes are going to be run in this simulation and either choose an existing or create a new simulation model for each process. The model is the detailed scenario we want to see our process perform under. When creating a new simulation model, we start with defining an initial template for our human activities in the process. How long do they take to complete? Is it a constant, uniform, exponential, or normal distribution for these tasks to complete? We'll set the mean time to be 10 minutes with a standard deviation for 1 minute for our lease approval human activities. We define who's going to work on these activities. A fixed set of resources where we have one person available for each activity, or do we want to use an organization definition for this simulation and choose a policy for how work should be routed? We will set up and use our organization. For system activities, service calls, and business rules, we can set a threshold for the number of available threads or the number of requests the service can handle at one time. This is extremely useful when our process incorporates a call to a legacy system which may not be capable of handling the current business demands. We can simulate a limited system to determine if this is a bottleneck within our process flow. Let's add this new simulation to our definition. Next, we choose to use organizational resources for our simulation model. Let's define who is working on our process. We can define for each resource their cost per hour, efficiency, capacity, availability, and the role they play in the process. Each of these items will be evaluated during the simulation run for who to route work to and how much work is being completed for each task in a role. This will enable us to look at key cost metrics, which tasks cost the most to complete, and drive decisions such as should this be automated if too costly. Identify bottlenecks in our process for human activities so we can identify if more resources are needed to work on a task. And finally, show the return on our BPM investment if we can make our users more efficient in getting their tasks completed through BPM. With our organization chart completed, we can now finish creating the simulation model. Now, we can run this simulation as is or drill down to perform more refinement on the model. Let's look at refining our simulation further before running. We are presented with the simulation definition view. From here we can add and remove resources, change the simulation start time and duration, and edit the simulation models we are running for our process. When we edit the simulation model, we are presented the process model itself so that we can, in context, make changes to each activity of the process. Being in the context of the process enables user productivity. I can switch to design mode, add or remove steps to the process, and seamlessly move back to the simulation definition. We can also create a new simulation model to represent a different scenario. We are modeling peak season. Maybe we want to create a low season model as well to simulate. Let's edit the Collect Lease Information task. Click the Edit pencil. We can change the simulation model settings for this particular activity. Since this is a human activity, it has picked up the defaults we chose during creation of this model for duration to complete the task, the resources available to work on the task. We can set cost per hour for this task to take into account our resource cost and any base cost that this task incurs regardless of who works on it. We will set the lease collections task base cost to $10 to capture costs associated with the clerk driving to meet potential lease candidates outside the office. For conditional transitions in the process flow, if we edit their definition, we are presented the ability to weight the paths we'll travel down to simulate behavior. At this point in the process lifecycle, we are basing this on information we collected during the design phase. A key feature of Oracle BPM is that we can build a simulation model based on runtime data. This means once we're in production, we can have a simulation that accurately represents the number of processes, time taken, and process branches traveled most frequently, enabling our process lifecycle to flow seamlessly from version 1 into process refinement for version 2 based on real-world data. When editing our system tasks, we will look at update lease information. We can set a duration for the completion of this service, number of threads available to simulate overloaded system behavior, and any costs associated with this call. Our lease system is hosted in the cloud and we're paying a cost per transaction of 10 cents, so we will set a fixed base cost for this activity. We will leave the remainder of the activities with their default simulation settings and move to running and analyzing the simulation. Let's save our changes and move back to our simulation definition tab. Our simulation models and definitions are saved as part of the BPM project and can be shared with BPM Studio through the process repository. This enables our analyst team to work seamlessly online or offline with processes and simulations. Clicking the green arrow in the top right runs our simulation to completion. We've now simulated 1 month's amount of work during our peak season. We are presented with our results in the bottom tab. We can filter the results based on time, cost, and units. For each dimension, we can display different sets of data in our simulation results. We can filter visibility to show results for all process activities or just human interactions. We can drill down to our process flow for a detailed view of how our process performed for this simulation by clicking on the graph. In this detailed view, we have the ability to change the dimension we're evaluating across cost, time, and units. Each change is reflected in the process model icons and in our process graph view. In the graph view, we can choose which metrics we're interested in viewing for the selected dimension. Minimizing the graph, we can navigate to the process model and drill down to see metrics for each activity. If we identify a potential change to our process, we can change our view, make the appropriate edit, and rerun our simulation. Process simulation provides a valuable toolset to our process analyst team to identify bottlenecks, find areas to reduce cost, and identify the value proposition for process automation. Being empowered to build and simulate in a collaborative environment of Process Composer drives productivity to new levels in Oracle BPM process lifecycle. With our initial process simulations and modeling complete, we're ready to collaborate with IT to implement our process.
Thanks, James, and thanks to Joakim and Pablo as well for letting us watch them using Oracle BPM Patch Set 6 as they went through a full end-to-end BPM lifecycle. It was very interesting and educational to see how these 3 business users interact with Oracle BPM to get their work done. Oracle BPM can help companies improve their business processes through automation and optimization. With the new release, we can improve business support through inclusive testing and process documentation. And of course, we know that Oracle BPM is built on top of the rock-solid foundation of Oracle Source Suite and WebLogic Server, so it offers great performance, extensive integration capabilities, and huge scalability. Thank you for joining us on this tour through some of the key features and benefits of Oracle BPM Suite.